The night was filled with the haunting cries of war, smoke rising into the cold sky as if the heavens themselves were mourning the chaos below. Among the ruins of a once thriving village, a young woman named Elira crouched behind a crumbled wall, clutching her shawl tightly around her trembling frame. She had seen too much in too little time: homes burned, lives cut short, innocence stolen by the cruelty of men who carried guns with no remorse. The echo of boots against stone reached her ears, heavy and unrelenting, until a shadow fell across her hiding place. When she looked up, her breath caught. A soldier stood before her, his rifle aimed at her heart, his eyes cold as steel. It was at that moment that desperation, fear, and a spark of courage combined into a plea that would change everything. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "don't shoot. I'll give you strong children if you spare me." The soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, but something in her words made him pause. His name was Derek, a man hardened by years of endless fighting, yet still human enough to feel the faint echo of a conscience. For months, he had been trained to see every villager as the enemy, as faceless obstacles in a war he never chose. But this girl's eyes burned with something that stirred an ache in his chest, a raw, unyielding will to live. He lowered his gun slowly, conflicted between his orders and the sudden weight pressing on his soul. Elira held her breath, expecting either mercy or death, but silence stretched between them like a fragile thread. At last, Derek spoke, his voice gruff but unsteady. "Go. Before I change my mind." But Elira did not run. Instead, she stood, her body shaking, and met his gaze with defiance. "If you truly wanted me dead, you would have done it already. Why are you sparing me?" Derek clenched his jaw, torn by questions he had buried long ago. He had been raised in the barracks, taught to obey without hesitation, to extinguish weakness before it rooted itself inside him. Yet something about this woman was different. She reminded him of the life he might have had if war had not consumed him, the laughter of a family, the warmth of a fire, the quiet dignity of a simple home. "I don't know," he admitted, lowering his gun completely. "But if you stay here, others won't be as merciful." Elira studied him for a moment, her chest heaving with fear and hope intermingled. Then she said the words that would change both their lives forever. "Take me with you. If I stay, I die. If I leave, maybe I live. Maybe you live too." Her voice was steady now, though her hands trembled. Derek looked at her as though she were both a burden and a salvation, but in the end, he gave a curt nod. The nights that followed were grueling, filled with danger at every turn as Elira followed the soldier through forests and over broken fields. She barely slept, her body aching from exhaustion, but she never complained. Each time her steps faltered, Derek would glance back, torn between annoyance and admiration at her stubborn persistence. They barely spoke, their words carried in stolen whispers when the silence of the night seemed too heavy. But slowly, an understanding began to weave itself between them. Derek saw her resilience, her refusal to crumble despite all she had lost. Elira saw the man beneath the soldier's mask, haunted by ghosts he could not name. One night, as they sheltered beneath the hollow of a fallen tree, Elira whispered, "Why do you fight this war?" Derek did not answer immediately, his silence louder than any confession. At last, he muttered, "Because I don't know how not to." Elira's heart ached at his words, for she saw not a monster, but a man who had been chained by duty and fear. She knew then that her plea had not only saved her life, it had given him a reason to question his own. Days turned into weeks, and their unlikely bond deepened, forged in the fires of survival. When food was scarce, Derek would give her the larger portion, though he pretended it was nothing. When danger lurked, he positioned himself between her and the shadows. And when nightmares shook him in the dead of night, Elira would place a hand on his arm, grounding him in the reality that he was no longer entirely alone. Slowly, trust began to replace fear. And in the quiet moments, when the world outside seemed to fade, something softer stirred between them, a fragile tenderness neither dared to name. Yet even as hope flickered, the war around them grew more ruthless. One morning, as they crossed into a valley where villages lay in ruin, Derek froze at the sound of marching footsteps. A patrol was near, and if they were caught, there would be no mercy. He pulled Elira into the shadows, his breath ragged, his grip on her wrist firm. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. She nodded, pressing against the stone wall beside him, her pulse pounding in her ears. The soldiers passed dangerously close, their laughter sharp, their boots striking the ground with cruel rhythm. One of them stopped, glancing around, suspicion etched across his face. Elira's heart nearly stopped, but Derek pressed her closer, his hand covering her mouth to stifle even the sound of her trembling breath. Only when the danger had passed did he release her, his hand lingering a moment too long, his eyes betraying a vulnerability he could no longer hide. That night, as they rested in a meadow under a sky littered with stars, Elira spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken truths. "You saved me twice now. Once from your gun, and once from theirs. Why?" Derek looked at her, his features softened by moonlight, and for the first time, he allowed himself honesty. "Because I don't want more blood on my hands. Because when I look at you, I see the life I never had but always wanted." His words hung in the night, raw and unpolished, but true. Elira's chest tightened, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She reached for his hand, her touch tentative but steady. "Then hold on to this chance," she whispered. "Maybe the war can't be stopped, but you can choose not to let it consume you anymore." For the first time in years, Derek allowed himself a small, broken smile. Their fragile peace was shattered days later when they stumbled upon a group of villagers hiding in the forest. Among them were children with hollow cheeks, mothers clutching babies, and old men too frail to stand. Elira's heart broke at the sight, for she saw her own family in their eyes, the family she had lost when her village burned. Derek hesitated, his instincts warning him to leave before the patrols discovered them, but Elira knelt among the villagers, offering comfort and what little food she and Derek had carried. "They need us," she said firmly when Derek tried to pull her away. His jaw tightened, his fear clashing with her conviction. "We can't save everyone," he argued, his voice laced with bitterness. But Elira's reply pierced through his defenses. "Maybe not. But we can save someone. Isn't that enough?" For the first time, Derek had no answer. As days passed, Derek found himself drawn into their struggle. He taught the villagers how to move quietly, how to avoid patrols, how to survive in the shadows. Elira became their beacon, her strength igniting hope in the broken hearts around her. Together, they transformed despair into resilience, though danger always loomed close. One night, as Derek stood watch at the edge of the camp, Elira approached him, her steps soft but sure. "You've changed," she said quietly, her eyes searching his. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line as he looked away. "Or maybe I'm just remembering who I was before all this." Elira smiled faintly, her hand brushing against his. "Whoever you are now, it's enough." The warmth in her voice cut through the coldness he had carried for so long, and for the first time, he dared to believe her. But war is not kind to those who hope. One dawn, the sound of gunfire shattered the fragile safety they had built. Enemy soldiers stormed the camp, their shouts and weapons tearing through the air. Chaos erupted as villagers scattered, screams blending with the crack of bullets. Derek grabbed Elira's hand, pulling her behind him, his weapon raised. He fought with a fury born not of duty, but of love, each shot fired to protect the lives huddled behind him. Yet the odds were against them, and soon they were surrounded. Elira clutched his arm, her eyes wide with terror, but before despair could swallow her, Derek leaned close. "Run when I tell you," he whispered fiercely. "Promise me." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Not without you." His heart twisted at her words, but before he could respond, the world erupted again in fire and blood. They fought side by side, their survival bound together by desperation and courage. Derek's every instinct screamed to shield Elira, even as bullets tore through the air around them. The villagers, inspired by their defiance, rose with whatever strength they had, turning fear into resistance. The battle was brutal, but in the chaos, something remarkable happened. The soldiers, unprepared for such fierce defense, began to falter. One by one, they retreated, leaving behind a battlefield littered with the cost of survival. When silence finally fell, the survivors clung to one another, weeping both for the lives saved and the lives lost. Derek collapsed to his knees, his body trembling, his chest heaving. Elira knelt beside him, cradling his face in her hands, her tears mingling with his sweat. "You chose life," she whispered. "You chose us." In the weeks that followed, the survivors rebuilt what little they could, crafting a fragile community in the ruins of war. Derek, once the soldier who carried death in his hands, became their protector, his past no longer a chain but a lesson. Elira remained by his side, her presence a reminder of the moment everything had changed, the moment she had begged for her life, and he had chosen mercy over destruction. Their bond deepened into love, not born of desperation, but of trust, resilience, and shared scars. And though the world around them was still fractured, they clung to one another as proof that even in the darkest times, humanity could bloom like a stubborn flower through cracked stone. When children's laughter returned to the camp, echoing through the air once stained with grief, Ellier's words proved truer than she had ever known. She had promised strong children, and together they had given the world not just strength, but hope. Would you like me to expand this even further into a full 15-minute script format with scene breaks and dialogue, perfect for YouTube narration, or keep it as a prose story like this?